Welcome to Ask Cadence, everybody. My name is Pete Wright. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sitting around the table with John Patton. Hello, John.
Hello, Pete.
Good to see you. And
Good
Scott
to see you.
Lissit once again is joining us.
Hi, Pete.
Good to see you too, sir.
Same here.
We are picking up a discussion we started last week, which was so interesting. We talked on and on about it. This is the idea of the importance of behavioral models to project management, behavioral models of human behavior. And we talked about the individual models there and broke down some of the various instruments that are important and gave some guidance on where they can be used and where they are best not used. This week we're going to continue on this idea of behavioral models, but focusing on the group and group behavior. I'm interested how this works. I think if you've been in a business meeting, you've been through the individual stuff, but group behavior is not quite as prevalent. So where do you start with understanding group behavior for project management, Scott?
Well, I think the first place where we have to start is by recognizing that most projects, if not all, have teams. So you've got more than one person working on a project. Sometimes you may have 5, 10, 15, 20, sometimes much more than that, 50, 60, 80 people on a large project team. And it's been very well shown that people behave differently in team settings than they do individually. And some of us may have heard the term groupthink. And this is a term that was coined to explain how sometimes groups can make worse decisions than individuals can. And it is because people have all kinds of things going through their minds as they're a member of a group. And so we're going to talk about a couple of models that have been developed for looking at group behavior.
Now, Scott,
John,
as a historian for the team, I went back to origins of individual group behavior and talked about Hippocrates, 400 BC. Well, you know, this stages of group development goes back in history to the early 1950s. And this was the field of sociology, and it focused on task group behavior. And it even focused on sizes of groups, you know, for a half a dozen up to a dozen people. Well, doesn't that coincide so nicely with project teams and the core project team? I think, Scott, you're going to talk about a couple that have survived the test of time and happen to be the two dominant models of group development still at work today.
Yeah, and let's start with one from Bruce Tuckman. This goes back to the 1960s. And this is one that some people may have heard and remembered because it's got a nice catchy rhyme to it. And this talks about the sequence of stages that a group will go through from the very beginning when they first start working together till the end. And it's called forming, storming, norming, performing, and then adjourning, although adjourning, but,
right.
but that doesn't rhyme as well, right? And so the reason this is important to know is because if you have a kickoff meeting for a project and the team seems to be fighting amongst themselves, representatives from different functional groups within the company seem to be arguing with each other. Some people may be presenting their own agenda, and the project manager may be panicking inside and saying, oh my goodness, how are we all going to work together? If that project manager knew that going through some of these phases is a normal part of team development, then they wouldn't be so worried. So let's look at the first one, forming. This is the phase where it is that initial kickoff meeting where people are sitting at the table for the first time. They may be a little bit reluctant to speak at first. They want to see who's there. They may maybe they want to play it safe, and so this could be the quiet before the storm, so to speak. But then we go to the storming phase, and this is where people are going to put on the table exactly what they need to put on the table. So it could be that they have a mission from the IT department. Someone from the IT department has been told that they need to make sure that any new project that starts takes into account the new IT procedures. And it doesn't matter what the project manager says or what anybody on the team says, they're going to get that idea across and they're going to fight for it. And it just so happens that this is the forum that you're going to see it in.
So storming, you're taking into account your own allegiances on behalf of, would that be a fair word, allegiance and leveraging that in the team environment?
Yeah, Pete, it could be the department agenda or it could be one's own individual agenda. A person who is a real technical specialist may have, they may be a purist. And so they may have their particular approach or agenda that they want to insert on this project.
And that could be they want to see a certain architecture for the system, and they know that the project manager has described a different one, but you know what? They're going to fight for it. And they're going to fight for it here.
It strikes me that even at this point, just because you say it's a team does not make it so. Right? I mean, here's a group of people sitting together in a room, but they're not really a team yet. If they were a team yet, so these issues would be easier to mitigate.
Those are often the terms that you hear. So
sure.
They're a designated team, but they haven't become a constructive working team yet.
Well, they haven't worked through the issues or the phases that they need to work through to become a well-forming team.
All right. So here we stormed.
Right. So once that's out on the table, people then once they've been heard, then they can now relax and now start to do their jobs. Once they've gotten everything on the table, they can now move on to norming. And then you go on to performing. So norming is where you've really now formed the framework for successfully working together, and then in the performing phase, now you do it. And then at the end, now you celebrate your success, and you send everybody back.
Cue music and
so
cheerful goodbye.
How does this apply
exactly
to effective project management by the project manager? In describing this one, Pete, I'm going to use an alternative structure, which is called Cogg's Ladder, and this was developed by George Charrier at Procter & Gamble. Now, this was the 70s, but it's still around today. For forming in the Tuckman model, he divided it into two phases. Polite, which is we get introduction from everybody, and why are we here? His observation was that teams need a purpose. So we need to answer that early on. The use of a project objective statement is very good. Fly to Mars and take pictures in 6 years for $6 billion. Some sort of thing that gives them the bounds of their authority. They were formed as a team to do this kind of thing. That answers why are we here. And there could be some discussion as to the details behind and how the project got authorized. Now, storming is called bid for power. It has the same definition. The project manager needs to move a team through these earlier phases quickly. How do we do it? We've got to start defining the project. One of the things we recommend is having a parking lot for these issues and agendas that come up, and we apply what's called a 5-minute rule. If we discuss something for 5 minutes and it hasn't been resolved, we at least acknowledge it by writing it down in the parking lot. And we continue moving through the steps of planning. Now, where does this need to be resolved? Well, part of planning is to have an objective statement. As you have to develop the scope of the project, and part of scope is to put together what's known as a work breakdown structure. That's a hierarchical view of work. Often you see people starting to come together as they realize what the different pieces of work of the project are at a detailed level, at a task level. That's when they can become constructive. So norming occurs while they're developing an understanding of the project, and we reach what's called the performing or constructive level. All teams to function must reach this fourth level. Now, there was a fifth level, which Charrier called esprit de corps. And that occurs, they just like the way they can produce results together. And when the project is over, they don't want to break up. That was called adjourning or mourning by Tuckman. And there have been some teams that looked for phase 2. They want to stay together. They'll propose more productive work. They start looking around for what they can do. And then there's just one more thing to understand about the stages of group development. It has been proven over and over again that when a new team member is introduced, the group tends to go backwards and reestablish, go through these stages and regroup itself a little faster, but assimilation of a new person goes through the stages of development. So in all of these cases, the project manager's job is to accelerate movement to a performing or to a constructive level.
Well, that was going to be my very next question. It's like you were reading my mind. How does a project manager insinuate themselves into the process, and at what points? I mean, there are some points, it seems, in this development process that you just have to go through. You have to go through the forming and storming phases. But how does the project manager jump in and say, you know, we need to move this forward?
Well, if the project manager tries to cut off some of the more unpleasant phases, like the storming phase or the bid for power, if the project manager cuts that off after 10 seconds, you know, we're not going to have any arguing on this project. You know what? That stuff is going to come out, and it's going to come out anyway, and it's going to be
at a much more painful place.
And it's going to be much harder, as John said, to get to that constructive or performing phase. So in some ways, the project manager has to just let this play out, but not too long. And that's where the judgment comes in.
Okay.
Yeah. So your question was, when does a project manager insert themselves? Well, right from the beginning. And this is really called leadership. So in Bid for Power, you let a person talk. And you let people discuss. However, we've put this limit of 5 minutes on there. Now, sometimes there will be a judgment call to let it go on a little longer. But when the issue is written down in the parking lot, it's got to be written in the words of the person who first raised that issue, and they have to be satisfied with it. So they're coming to some kind of closure that says, well, my issue has been recognized. Yeah, we can go ahead with planning, and I'm confident that we'll address it later on. What really turns off people, as Scott says, is when they feel their issue has not been recognized, and then they become this broken record. They will continually try, and you may have seen people 3 or 4 or 5 times. The problem with this project is going to be, and that becomes how they insert themselves, and they say the same thing over and over again.
Well, something else to keep in mind here is that different companies or different organizations have different cultures. And in some organizations, it may be the culture to be very consensus driven. And so you may find that everybody expects to be heard, everybody expects their concerns to be addressed before you move on. Now, the project manager has to be cognizant of the culture, but at the same time, they have to, as John said, know when to lead the team beyond a phase if they're getting stuck.
Well, and it seems like what both of you have just talked about really sets the standard for doing that. First of all, you let the pieces that need to flow, let the hard stuff happen, but you make sure you're setting a consistent rule set, right? Rules of the sandbox, if they're applied consistently, builds confidence, does it not?
Yeah, it's all part of leadership.
Sure.
And project control. Now, we all keep Guinness Book of World Records here on the worst cases that we've been called in to consult. And mine is of a project team in a financial institution that had been what Scott described, this open-ended, you have to let people talk, and they had been in norming, and they called it role definition for 2 months. Now, they had a lot of warm, fuzzy feeling about each other, but no work was getting out. And the management called us in for consulting help to break through this sort of gridlock of getting to understand each other.
Did that 2 months end up making it easier to do that?
Oh yeah, it closed very quickly.
Yeah.
But you can do it faster than
Sure.
this.
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention too is that the team members will feel better and relax if they know that the project manager knows what they're doing. And so if you come to the table with a sound methodology and you're explaining to the team what we're doing, why we're doing it, and when we're doing it, they'll feel much better. If they feel like there's a gap in understanding or capability at the project manager level, people may feel they have to jump in and try to guide the project. And that can be very disruptive, and you'll never get into the performing phase.
Another fascinating discussion on this. I'm thrilled that we're carrying this over several weeks. Thank you both for your time and input this morning. On behalf of Scott Lissit and John Patton, I'm Pete Wright. Thank you to all of you who've downloaded this week's show, and we will be with you next week on Ask Cadence.